Victoria Chen Morrison stood outside the gleaming entrance of Bergdorf Goodman, her hand instinctively protecting her 38-week pregnant belly as Manhattan's October wind whipped around her. The designer shopping bags rustled as affluent women hurried past, their heels clicking against the pristine sidewalk like a staccato rhythm of privilege and power. Victoria, stop being so dramatic. It was just a tiny push, Marcus Morrison said, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone that made her stomach clench with more than just pregnancy discomfort. Her millionaire ex-husband, though he wasn't her ex yet, that would come later, towered over her with his 6'2" frame, his perfectly tailored charcoal suit making him look every inch the successful tech executive he'd spent 20 years becoming. His dark hair was styled with the precision of a man who spent more on monthly grooming than most families spent on groceries. Marcus, I need to ask you about something, Victoria began, her voice soft but determined. At 39, she had learned to measure her words carefully around him, but today felt different. Maybe it was the hormones, or maybe it was the growing realization that their daughter would be born into this dynamic unless something changed. Make it quick. The car is waiting, he replied, checking his Apple Watch with the impatience of someone who believed his time was worth more than everyone else's. Victoria pulled out her phone, the screen displaying their joint bank account. Her hands trembled slightly as she showed him the balance. $20,000 is missing from our emergency fund. The money I saved from my freelance projects. Marcus's jaw tightened, a telltale sign that his controlled facade was beginning to crack. Do not question my financial decisions in public, Victoria. But that was for Emma's nursery, her medical expenses. I said not here. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, the kind that preceded his worst outbursts. Taxi brakes squealed nearby as traffic thickened during the lunch rush. Victoria glanced around at the bustling street, thinking the public setting would keep him reasonable. She had miscalculated badly. Marcus, we agreed that money was for our daughter. I worked nights for months to save it while carrying your child. Her voice grew stronger with each word. 20 years of suppressed frustration finally finding an outlet. My child, he corrected coldly. Everything you earn, everything you save, everything you are belongs to this family, which means it belongs to me. The words hit her like a physical blow. Victoria had heard this logic before, woven through their entire marriage like a poisonous thread, but never stated so baldly. I'm not your property, Marcus. His hand flew across her face with a crack that echoed off the storefront windows. The slap was so sudden, so shocking, that Victoria's mind went blank for several seconds. Her cheek burned with immediate fire, and she pressed her palm against it, feeling the heat radiating from where his ring had caught her skin. Gasps erupted from nearby pedestrians. Oh my God, did you see that? A woman's voice carried clearly through the crisp air. Someone call the police, another voice urged. Victoria looked up through tears she hadn't realized were falling and saw something that made her blood run cold. Dozens of phones were pointed in their direction, their cameras capturing her humiliation for the world to see. The modern Greek chorus of social media had witnessed her shame, and there was no taking it back. Get in the car. Now, Marcus hissed, grabbing her arm with enough force to leave fingerprints on her pale skin. As he pushed her toward their waiting black Mercedes, Victoria caught fragments of conversations around them. Did you get that on video? I'm posting this right now. That poor woman. Isn't that Marcus Morrison? The tech guy. Victoria slid into the leather passenger seat, her mind reeling. In 20 years of marriage, Marcus had never hit her in public. His control was usually more subtle, more psychological, but something about her challenging him over money, over their daughter's future, had broken through his carefully maintained image. The driver, a man named James who had worked for them for 5 years, met her eyes in the rearview mirror. His expression was carefully neutral, but she saw something there, concern, maybe even sympathy. Home, Mr. Morrison? James asked quietly. Yes. Quickly. As they pulled into traffic, Victoria stared out the window at the people on the sidewalk. some still holding their phones, still recording. She had become a viral moment before she even understood what that meant. Her phone buzzed with notifications, text messages, social media alerts, missed calls. The digital wildfire had already begun. Marcus was on his phone immediately, his voice sharp and efficient. "David, we have a situation. I need you to handle some damage control immediately." Victoria listened to her husband, the father of her unborn child, discuss her humiliation like a business problem to be solved. She realized with crystal clarity that she wasn't his wife in this moment. She was a liability to be managed. Her hand moved to her belly, where Emma was moving restlessly, as if sensing her mother's distress. "I'm sorry, baby girl," she whispered so quietly that only her daughter could hear. "Mama's going to figure this out." But as their car climbed toward their Upper East Side penthouse, Victoria had no idea that in just a few hours, the video of her public humiliation would be viewed by millions of people around the world. She had no idea that her moment of greatest vulnerability would become the catalyst for finding her voice. All she knew was that something fundamental had shifted. The perfect marriage facade they had maintained for 2 decades had cracked as publicly and dramatically as the sound of his hand against her face. And there was no going back. 3 hours earlier, Victoria had woken up believing her biggest worry was choosing between Emma Rose and Emma Grace for their daughter's middle name. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, casting geometric patterns across the pristine, white marble floors that Marcus had chosen without consulting her. She had stood in their walk-in closet, a space larger than most people's bedrooms, surrounded by clothes that Marcus approved of. Her own style had been gradually edited out over the years, replaced by his vision of what a successful man's wife should look like. "You should wear the blue dress today. Victoria, the navy one. It photographs better," Marcus had called from their bedroom, where he was scrolling through financial reports on his tablet. Victoria fingered the floral dress she had been drawn to, a soft pink that reminded her of her mother's garden. "I was thinking maybe the floral pattern. It's such a beautiful fall day." "The blue dress, Victoria." The tone brooked no argument. Victoria had learned over 20 years of marriage to recognize the subtle inflections that meant Marcus had made a decision that wouldn't be changed. She pulled the navy dress from its hanger, noting how it hung loose around her pregnant belly, making her look more like a corporate wife than an expectant mother. As she dressed, Victoria caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror. At 39, she was still beautiful, but it was a carefully maintained beauty that required constant vigilance. Weekly appointments, monthly treatments, quarterly procedures, all overseen by Marcus's preferences. "When did I stop recognizing myself?" she had whispered to her reflection. "Did you say something?" Marcus appeared behind her, already dressed in his $1,000 suit, his reflection commanding even more space in the mirror than hers. "Just talking to Emma," she lied smoothly, a skill she had perfected over their marriage. Marcus placed his hands on her shoulders, and she saw them in the mirror, the perfect, successful couple. His smile was practiced, camera ready. "Our daughter is going to have everything. Victoria. The best schools, the best opportunities, the best life money can buy." Victoria nodded, but something cold settled in her stomach. "What about the best parents?" "She'll have that too. A father who can provide for her, and a mother who knows how to support that success." The words hung in the air between them like a contract she didn't remember signing. Breakfast was served by their housekeeper, Maria, who had worked for them for 8 years and spoke mostly to Victoria in Spanish, a small rebellion that Marcus tolerated because Maria's work was impeccable. "Senora, you look tired," Maria said quietly as she placed fresh fruit and whole-grain toast in front of Victoria. "Just pregnancy fatigue," Victoria replied, but Maria's concerned eyes suggested she saw more than exhaustion. Marcus was absorbed in his phone, fielding calls and messages from his various business ventures. His tech company was preparing for a massive IPO that would increase their net worth by hundreds of millions. Victoria used to be excited by his success, but now it felt like another wall being built around their life. "I was thinking about the nursery today," Victoria said during a lull in his phone activity. Maybe we could finish setting it up this weekend. I hired a decorator for that. She'll handle everything according to the specifications I gave her. But I'd like to be involved. She's my daughter too. Marcus looked up from his phone, his expression patient but condescending. Victoria, you're emotional right now. Pregnancy hormones affect judgment. It's better if professionals handle the important decisions. The phrase pregnancy hormones had become his catch-all explanation for any opinion she expressed that differed from his. Victoria felt the familiar doubt creep in. Was she being unreasonable? Was her desire to decorate her own daughter's nursery really just hormonal irrationality? But then Emma kicked, a strong movement that reminded Victoria of her own agency in this pregnancy. I want to choose some things for her room. Marcus, even if it's just the mobile above her crib. He studied her for a long moment, then smiled indulgently. Of course, sweetheart. You can choose the mobile. It was a small victory, but Victoria felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years, successful advocacy for what she wanted. After Marcus left for his office, Victoria found herself alone with her thoughts and her growing anxiety about their financial future. She loved Marcus, had built her entire adult life around supporting his dreams. But lately, she felt like she was disappearing piece by piece. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Sarah. How are you feeling today? Honey, any signs of labor? Victoria stared at the message, realizing she hadn't spoken to Sarah in 2 weeks. Marcus didn't explicitly forbid her relationships with her family, but he had a way of scheduling conflicts and creating obligations that made maintaining friendships increasingly difficult. She typed back, still pregnant, miss talking to you. Sarah's response came immediately, want to meet for lunch, just the two of us. Victoria looked around their empty penthouse, filled with beautiful things that felt more like museum pieces than belongings. I'd love that, but Marcus has plans for us today. What plans, Victoria realized she didn't actually know. Marcus had simply told her to be ready to go out after lunch, and she had accepted it without question. Actually, let me check with him, she typed, then immediately deleted the message. Why did she need permission to have lunch with her sister? A new message appeared. I'll be at Cafe Luna at 1 p.m. Hope to see you there. Victoria stared at the message for several minutes, then made a decision that felt both thrilling and terrifying. She typed, see you at 1. As she prepared to leave the penthouse, Victoria caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror again. But this time, instead of seeing Marcus's carefully curated version of a successful wife, she saw glimpses of the woman she used to be, someone who made decisions, who had opinions, who existed independently of her husband's preferences. The feeling was intoxicating and dangerous. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, unaware that her small act of rebellion would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The mobile banking app on her phone would soon reveal a devastating truth, and her confrontation with Marcus about missing money would unfold in front of cameras that would broadcast her humiliation to the world. But in that moment, walking toward lunch with her sister, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of choosing her own path. By the time Victoria and Marcus reached their penthouse, the video had already been viewed 50,000 times. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt endless, with Marcus making rapid-fire phone calls while Victoria pressed a bag of ice against her swollen cheek. David, I need a full crisis management team assembled within the hour, Marcus barked into his phone. And get Jennifer Walsh on the line. We need legal counsel immediately. Victoria watched the numbers climb on the elevator display, each floor taking her further from the woman who had stood up to her husband on a public street. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a familiar fog of doubt and self-recrimination. Their penthouse door opened to reveal Maria hovering anxiously in the foyer. Her eyes widened when she saw Victoria's bruised face. Dios mío, Señora Victoria, Maria whispered, rushing forward with genuine concern. It's nothing, Maria, Victoria said automatically, but her voice cracked on the words. Marcus brushed past both women. Maria, we need privacy. Take the rest of the day off. But Señora Victoria needs, She needs privacy, Marcus repeated firmly. We'll call if we need anything. After Maria left reluctantly, gathering her coat and purse while shooting worried glances at Victoria, Marcus began pacing their living room like a caged predator. His phone rang constantly: business partners, board members, his mother, his publicist. Victoria lowered herself carefully onto their white leather sofa, her pregnant body aching from stress and shock. She pulled out her own phone with trembling fingers and opened social media for the first time in months. The video was everywhere. Multiple angles of the slap, taken by different bystanders, had been compiled into a devastating montage. Some versions included slow-motion replays. Others focused on her face after the impact, capturing her shock and pain in brutal clarity. The comments were a battlefield. That poor woman. Someone needs to help her. Typical rich man thinking he owns his wife. She must have done something to deserve it. Why didn't anyone intervene? This is why I carry pepper spray. Pregnant women are so emotional. He probably just snapped. The hashtag pregnant wife slapped was trending nationally. Victoria's private humiliation had become public entertainment, dissected by strangers who felt entitled to judge her marriage, her choices, her worth as a human being. Victoria, put the phone down, Marcus commanded, ending his latest call. Social media is toxic. It will only upset you more. But Victoria couldn't stop scrolling. Mixed in with the cruel comments and hot takes were messages that made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. I left my abusive husband last year. You can do this. The way you protected your belly even while he was hitting you, you're already being the mother your daughter needs. There are resources. There is help. You don't have to stay. 20 years I was married to a man like this. You're not alone. Marcus appeared beside her, gently but firmly taking her phone away. This is exactly what I was worried about. You're getting yourself worked up over nothing. Nothing? Victoria looked up at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Marcus, millions of people just watched you hit your pregnant wife. I didn't hit you. I reacted to your hysteria with an unfortunate gesture that has been blown completely out of proportion by social media mob mentality. The clinical way he described her pain, his violence reframed as her hysteria, his choice recharacterized as an unfortunate gesture, made something crystallize in Victoria's mind. Is that what you're going to tell our daughter when she's old enough to find this video? That Mama was hysterical. Marcus sat down beside her, his voice taking on the patient tone he used with difficult clients. Victoria, you're thinking emotionally right now. Pregnancy hormones, stress from the media attention, the normal anxiety of expectant mothers. You're not seeing this situation clearly? There it was again, pregnancy hormones. The magic phrase that dismissed any thought, feeling, or opinion she expressed that didn't align with his worldview. Victoria stood up slowly, her hand supporting her lower back. I'm going to lie down. Good idea. I'll have Maria make you some tea when she comes back tomorrow. As Victoria walked toward their bedroom, she heard Marcus on the phone again. David, we need to control the narrative. This is a private family matter involving a pregnant woman under enormous stress. The public needs to understand that social media lynch mobs destroy families. She paused in the hallway, listening to her husband craft a story that painted her as the problem and him as the victim of an overzealous digital culture. Victoria is fragile right now, he continued. The pregnancy has been difficult, and she's been having emotional episodes. Today's incident was the culmination of weeks of increasingly erratic behavior. The words hit her like physical blows. Marcus was already building a case against her mental health, creating a narrative that would justify his actions while questioning her fitness as a mother. Victoria made it to their bedroom and closed the door behind her. She sat on the edge of their king-size bed, another choice Marcus had made without consulting her, and tried to process what was happening. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Honey, I just saw the news. Are you okay? I'm coming over. Victoria typed back quickly. Don't come. Marcus needs space to handle this. Screw what Marcus needs. What do you need? The question stopped Victoria cold. When was the last time someone had asked what she needed? When was the last time she had even considered her own needs, separate from Marcus's requirements and preferences? Before she could answer, another text arrived. I'm in the lobby. The doorman won't let me up without permission. Victoria realized that even her own sister couldn't reach her without going through Marcus's security protocols. She was living in a beautiful prison, and she had helped build the walls. She heard Marcus's voice in the living room, growing louder and more agitated as the crisis management calls continued. At one point, she heard him say, "We might need to consider her mental fitness as a mother if she continues to be unstable." The words sent ice through her veins. Victoria understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that this wasn't just about damage control for his business reputation. Marcus was building a case that would let him take Emma away from her. She looked around their bedroom, seeing it differently now. The security cameras Marcus had installed for their protection, the controlled access to their building, the joint accounts where he monitored every transaction, the gradual isolation from her family and friends. Victoria realized she wasn't just a wife who had been publicly humiliated by her millionaire ex-husband-to-be. She was a woman who had been systematically trapped, and today's slap had simply revealed the cage that had been building around her for 20 years. Emma kicked hard, as if responding to her mother's racing heartbeat. Victoria placed both hands on her belly and made a promise to her unborn daughter. "We're going to figure this out, baby girl. Mama's going to find a way." But as night fell over Manhattan and the video continued to spread across the internet, Victoria had no idea how to keep that promise. All she knew was that going back to the way things were was no longer an option. The woman who had stood up to Marcus Morrison on a public street was still inside her somewhere. Victoria just had to find the courage to let her out again. The next morning brought a fresh wave of media attention and a carefully orchestrated plan to manage Victoria's narrative. Marcus had assembled a team overnight: his lawyer Jennifer Walsh, crisis management specialist David Chen, and a psychiatrist named Dr. Robert Steinberg, who specialized in pregnancy-related emotional disorders. Victoria sat in their living room at 9 a.m., still in her bathrobe, feeling like she was attending a meeting about someone else's life. The men wore expensive suits and spoke about her in clinical terms, while Jennifer Walsh took notes with the efficiency of someone billing $400 an hour. "The key is establishing a pattern of instability," Dr. Steinberg explained, reviewing a file that somehow already contained details about Victoria's life. "Pregnancy can exacerbate underlying emotional issues. With the right documentation, we can present a compelling case that Mrs. Morrison needs support, not condemnation." "What kind of support?" Victoria asked, her voice hoarse from crying herself to sleep. Marcus answered before the doctor could respond. "The kind that protects you and Emma from the stress of this media circus. The kind that ensures our daughter is born into a stable environment." Jennifer Walsh looked up from her legal pad. "Victoria, we need you to understand that social media attention can be very damaging to families. The best thing for everyone is to present a united front and clarify what really happened yesterday." "What really happened?" Victoria repeated slowly. "Is that my husband slapped me in public for questioning where he spent our daughter's emergency fund. You see," Dr. Steinberg made a note, "this fixation on financial details, the inability to see the broader context of family dynamics, these are classic signs of pregnancy-related anxiety disorders." Victoria felt like she was drowning in their words. Everything she said was being twisted into evidence of her instability, while Marcus's violence was reframed as an understandable response to her condition. "I need some air," she said, standing up carefully. "Actually, Victoria, it would be better if you stayed home today," Marcus said. "The media attention has been intense, and we don't want to give them more material to work with." "You mean you don't want anyone to see my bruised face?" "I mean, I want to protect my pregnant wife from harassment." Victoria excused herself to the bathroom, needing to escape their suffocating concern for her well-being. As she walked down the hallway, she heard Dr. Steinberg's voice carrying clearly from the living room. "The pattern is textbook: social withdrawal, fixation on minor issues, Confrontational behavior with the spouse. If she doesn't cooperate with treatment recommendations, we have options. Postpartum depression affects judgment significantly. Judges are very sympathetic to concerned fathers who want to protect their children. Victoria stopped walking. Through the partially open door, she could see Marcus nodding thoughtfully. How long would that process take? Marcus asked. If we document everything properly, we could have a preliminary custody evaluation within weeks of the birth. The key is establishing that her current mental state poses a risk to the child's well-being. Victoria pressed her back against the hallway wall, her mind reeling. They weren't discussing her medical care or emotional support. They were planning to take Emma away from her by building a case that she was mentally unfit to be a mother. Jennifer Walsh's voice joined the conversation. The domestic violence allegations become irrelevant if we can show that Victoria's perception of events was distorted by her psychological condition. A woman suffering from pregnancy-induced psychosis might misinterpret normal marital disagreements as abuse. Pregnancy-induced psychosis. Marcus sounded intrigued by the terminology. It's rare but documented. Hormonal changes can cause pregnant women to become paranoid, aggressive, and disconnected from reality. Dr. Steinberg's evaluation could support that diagnosis. Victoria felt bile rise in her throat. She was listening to professionals, people with degrees and licenses and reputations, conspiracy to gaslight her into believing she was insane. She made it to the bathroom and locked the door behind her, then sat on the edge of the marble bathtub and tried to think clearly. Her phone was in Marcus's possession. Her sister couldn't reach her without permission, and she was surrounded by people who were being paid to question her sanity. But she wasn't crazy. She knew what had happened yesterday, knew the pattern of control that had defined her marriage, knew the difference between love and ownership. Victoria looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, seeing the bruise that makeup couldn't quite cover, and made a decision that terrified and liberated her in equal measure. She unlocked the bathroom door and walked back to the living room, where the four professionals were deep in discussion about her psychological evaluation timeline. "I won't be participating in any of this," she announced. The conversation stopped abruptly. Marcus turned to her with the patient expression he reserved for her most unreasonable moments. "Victoria, we're trying to help you." "No, you're trying to help yourself. You're trying to protect your business reputation and your IPO by convincing everyone that I'm mentally ill." Dr. Steinberg made another note. "This type of paranoid thinking is consistent with the diagnosis we discussed." Victoria looked at the doctor, then at Jennifer Walsh, then at David Chen. "How much is he paying you to call me crazy?" "Victoria, please sit down," Marcus said. "You're becoming agitated." "I'm becoming clear," she corrected. "For the first time in 20 years, I'm seeing this situation clearly." She turned to face all four of them, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am not mentally ill. I am not paranoid. I am not suffering from pregnancy-induced psychosis. I am a woman who has been financially controlled, emotionally manipulated, and physically assaulted by her husband. And I am not going to let you gaslight me into believing otherwise." The room fell silent. Marcus's carefully composed expression cracked for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Victoria, you're having an episode," he said softly. "Dr. Steinberg, I think we need to consider immediate intervention." But Victoria was already walking toward the door. "I'm leaving." "You can't leave," Marcus said, standing up. "You're not thinking rationally." "Watch me." Victoria grabbed her purse from the foyer table, grateful that her wallet and identification were still inside. As she reached for the door handle, Marcus grabbed her arm. "Victoria, if you walk out that door, there will be consequences. For you and for Emma." She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. "Let go of me. I'm trying to protect you. You're trying to control me. There's a difference?" Victoria pulled free and opened the door. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard Jennifer Walsh say, "This erratic behavior supports our case perfectly." The elevator ride down felt like traveling from one world to another. In the penthouse, she was Marcus Morrison's unstable wife, who needed professional intervention. In the lobby, she was Victoria Chen Morrison, a woman who had just walked away from everything she knew to protect her unborn daughter. The doorman looked surprised to see her. "Mrs. Morrison, do you need a car?" "No, thank you. I'm meeting my sister." Victoria walked out into the bright Manhattan morning, feeling both terrified and exhilarated. She had no plan, no money beyond what was in her wallet, and no idea what would happen next. But for the first time in 20 years, she was making her own choices. As she hailed a taxi to take her to Sarah's apartment, Victoria realized that the team upstairs was probably already spinning her departure as further evidence of her mental instability. They would use her flight to safety as proof that she posed a danger to Emma. The fight for her daughter hadn't even begun, and Victoria was already losing. But at least now she knew she was in a fight. Victoria walked 20 blocks before realizing she had nowhere to go. The October morning air felt sharp against her face, each breath a reminder that she was free from the suffocating atmosphere of Marcus's carefully controlled world. Her pregnant body protested the unaccustomed exercise, but her mind felt clearer than it had in years. She called Sarah from a coffee shop in Midtown, her hands shaking as she dialed. "Victoria, thank God. I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. Are you okay?" "I left him," Victoria said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "I walked out." There was a pause, then Sarah's voice came back fierce and protective. "I'm coming to get you. Where are you?" 20 minutes later, Victoria found herself in Sarah's small but warm Brooklyn apartment, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a life lived authentically. Books stacked everywhere, plants that seemed to thrive despite irregular watering, and photos of family and friends covering every surface. "I've been waiting 20 years for you to leave him," Sarah admitted as she made tea with hands that trembled slightly. "Why didn't you say something? Would you have listened?" Victoria considered this honestly. Probably not. Sarah sat down across from her sister, studying the bruise that had darkened overnight. "Victoria, what he did was assault. In front of witnesses. You could press charges. His lawyers are already building a case that I'm mentally unfit to be a mother. If I fight him legally, they'll use it as evidence that I'm vindictive and unstable. And if you don't fight him, he gets to control the narrative completely." Victoria pulled out her phone, which had been buzzing constantly with notifications. "Look at this." She showed Sarah the flood of messages from strangers around the world. Women sharing their own stories of abuse, offering resources, providing support. But mixed in were cruel comments questioning her motives, her timing, her worthiness as a victim. "The internet is a double-edged sword," Sarah observed. "But look at these numbers. Victoria, thousands of women are supporting you." One message in particular caught Victoria's attention. It was from a woman named Jennifer Martinez. "I stayed with my abusive husband for 15 years because I thought leaving would be worse for my children. I was wrong. My kids are happier, healthier, and safer now. You're already being the mother your daughter needs by protecting her from this environment." Victoria read the message aloud, her voice breaking on the last words. "You are," Sarah said firmly. "You're already protecting Emma by refusing to let her grow up thinking this is what love looks like." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah looked through the peephole and sighed. "It's Jenny Walsh, my friend who's a family law attorney." Jennifer Walsh was nothing like Marcus's lawyer. She was young, fierce, and wore jeans with her blazer. She sat at Sarah's kitchen table and laid out Victoria's legal options with brutal honesty. "The good news is that domestic violence is taken seriously in New York, especially when there's video evidence. The bad news is that your husband has resources and connections. He'll fight dirty." "How dirty?" Victoria asked. "He's already building a case that you're mentally unstable. I've seen this playbook before. Wealthy men use psychiatric evaluations and character assassination to paint their wives as unfit mothers." Victoria felt her hopes sinking. "So I can't win?" "I didn't say that, but you need to be prepared for a long, expensive battle. Do you have access to any independent funds?" Victoria shook her head. "Everything is joint accounts. He monitors every transaction. What about your freelance work? Any clients who might hire you again? I haven't worked in 5 years. Marcus convinced me it was better to focus on supporting his career. Jenny made notes as they talked, building a picture of Victoria's financial dependence and social isolation. This is classic economic abuse. We can document the pattern of control, but judges are sometimes skeptical of women who stayed in privileged situations. Privileged, Victoria felt anger flare. I was trapped in a golden cage. I believe you, but you'll need to convince a judge who might think a penthouse and unlimited shopping are adequate compensation for emotional abuse. That afternoon, Victoria sat alone in Sarah's living room while her sister worked from home. She read through hundreds of messages from women who had recognized their own experiences in her viral video. A reporter named Maria Santos reached out through direct message. I specialize in stories about domestic violence and would like to offer you a platform to tell your story in your own words. No ambush interviews, no gotcha questions, just the truth from your perspective. Victoria stared at the message for a long time. Going public would mean giving up any chance of reconciliation with Marcus, any hope of handling this privately, but it would also mean taking control of her own narrative. She called Jenny Walsh for advice. It's risky, Jenny admitted, but it might be your only chance to counter his version of events before it becomes the accepted truth. What if I say something wrong? What if I make things worse? Victoria, can things really get worse than letting him define you as mentally unstable to the entire world? That evening, Sarah made dinner while Victoria practiced what she might say in an interview. Every time she started to speak, she heard Marcus's voice in her head. You're being too emotional. You're not seeing this clearly. You're not thinking rationally. Stop, Sarah said firmly, setting down her wooden spoon. I can see you doubting yourself. That's his voice, not yours. How do I tell the difference anymore? Start by telling me what happened yesterday, not what Marcus says happened, not what the media says happened, what you experienced. Victoria took a deep breath and began to speak, as she described the confrontation, the slap, the humiliation. Her voice grew stronger and clearer. This was her truth, unfiltered by Marcus's interpretations or society's judgments. That's the voice, Sarah said when Victoria finished. That's the woman who needs to tell her story. Victoria looked at her reflection in Sarah's bathroom mirror that night and saw someone she hadn't seen in years herself, unedited and authentic. The woman looking back at her was bruised but not broken, frightened but not defeated. She picked up her phone and typed a response to Maria Santos. I'm ready to tell my story. The interview was scheduled for the next day. Victoria had less than 24 hours to find the courage to reclaim her narrative from the man who had spent 20 years convincing her that her voice didn't matter. As she fell asleep on Sarah's couch, Emma moving restlessly in her belly, Victoria realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. Women around the world were watching, learning, finding courage in her willingness to speak truth to power. She had accidentally become a symbol, and now she had to find the strength to live up to what she represented. The fight for her daughter and for her own identity was just beginning. The television studio lights felt warm on Victoria's face as she sat across from Maria Santos in what felt like the most important conversation of her life. The cameras rolled, but for the first time in days, Victoria wasn't afraid of being recorded. This time, she was choosing to tell her story. Victoria, thank you for agreeing to speak with us today. I know this hasn't been easy. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Maria, for 20 years, other people have been speaking for me. Today, I want to speak for myself. Victoria's voice was steady, clear, and completely different from the hesitant woman who had stood outside Bergdorf Goodman 3 days earlier. She had spent the morning practicing with Sarah, finding the words to describe 20 years of subtle erosion that had culminated in one moment of public violence. Let's start with what happened on Monday. Can you walk us through the events leading up to the incident? Victoria took a deep breath and began. I had discovered that $20,000 was missing from our joint account, money I had saved from freelance work over months of late nights while carrying our daughter. When I asked Marcus about it, he told me not to question his financial decisions in public. This was money you had earned. Yes, but Marcus has always maintained that everything I earn belongs to the family, which in practice means it belongs to him. I haven't had independent access to money in years. Maria leaned forward slightly. Can you describe the pattern of financial control in your marriage? It started gradually. First, it was efficiency. Marcus was better with money, so he should handle our finances. Then it was protection. I didn't need to worry about bills or investments. Eventually, I realized I couldn't buy a cup of coffee without him knowing about it within the hour. Victoria described the monitoring, the questioning, the gradual elimination of her financial independence. She explained how Marcus had convinced her to stop working, to focus on supporting his career, to trust him to handle everything. When I tried to save money for Emma's nursery, I had to work freelance projects in secret. Even then, he found out and took control of those accounts too. Victoria, your husband's representatives have suggested that pregnancy hormones affected your judgment that day. How do you respond to that? For the first time since sitting down, Victoria felt anger flash across her face. The phrase pregnancy hormones has been Marcus's explanation for any opinion I've expressed in the last 9 months that differs from his. I'm not allowed to disagree, to question, or to advocate for myself without being dismissed as emotional or irrational. Is this pattern new to your pregnancy? No, it's just intensified. For 20 years, Marcus has had an explanation for why my feelings, thoughts, and preferences were wrong or misguided. I was too sensitive, too naive, too focused on small details instead of the big picture. Victoria's voice grew stronger as she continued. I stayed because I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought being a good wife meant making myself smaller so my husband could feel bigger. I didn't realize it had become self-erasure. Maria nodded. What was the moment you realized things had to change? When I heard Marcus and his team planning to use psychiatric evaluations to take Emma away from me, they weren't discussing my mental health care. They were strategizing about how to convince a judge that I was unfit to be a mother. Victoria described overhearing the conversation about pregnancy-induced psychosis, about building a case based on her erratic behavior, about using her flight to safety as evidence of her instability. They turned everything upside down. My husband hitting me became evidence of my hysteria. My questioning financial decisions became proof of my paranoia. My walking away to protect my daughter became a sign that I was a danger to her. How did that make you feel? Terrified, but also clear. For the first time in years, I could see the situation without Marcus's interpretation clouding my judgment. Victoria talked about the isolation, the way Marcus had gradually separated her from family and friends through scheduling conflicts and created obligations. She described the constant monitoring, the way every aspect of her life had been subject to his approval. People look at our lifestyle and think I was privileged. A penthouse, unlimited shopping, financial security. But privilege without autonomy is just a beautiful prison. Maria asked about the future. What do you want people to understand about your situation? I want other women to know that abuse doesn't always look like what you see in movies. It can be subtle, gradual, wrapped in concern and protection. It can come from someone who truly believes he loves you. Victoria paused, placing her hand on her belly where Emma was moving. I want my daughter to grow up knowing that women have voices worth hearing. That love doesn't require you to disappear. That being cared for and being controlled are not the same thing. What message do you have for women who might see themselves in your story? Victoria looked directly into the camera, speaking to the thousands of women who had reached out to her over the past few days. You're not crazy. You're not too sensitive. You're not imagining it. Trust your instincts. Document everything. And remember that leaving is not failing. It's protecting yourself and your children from learning that this is what love looks like. The interview lasted an hour, but it felt like minutes. When the cameras stopped rolling, Victoria felt drained but liberated. She had told her truth without Marcus's interpretation, without his lawyer's spin, without apology or qualification. Maria walked her out of the studio personally. Victoria, that was incredibly brave. Your story is going to help a lot of women. Nakwarwa. But as Victoria left the building, her phone was already buzzing with Marcus's response. His PR team had released a statement questioning her mental stability, citing her recent erratic behavior, and expressing concern for her well-being. The battle for public opinion was just beginning, but Victoria had fired the first honest shot. For better or worse, she had chosen to trust that the truth was worth fighting for. As she rode back to Sarah's apartment, Victoria realized that the woman who had sat in that interview chair was someone she barely recognized: strong, articulate, unafraid to take up space. It had taken 20 years and a public humiliation to find her voice. Now she had to learn how to keep using it. Marcus's forced apology came exactly 72 hours after the interview aired, when his lawyers calculated it would do the most good for his reputation and the least harm to his legal position. Victoria watched it from Sarah's couch, her hand resting on her belly as Emma kicked restlessly, as if sensing her mother's tension. The video was professionally produced, shot in Marcus's home office with careful lighting that made him look remorseful but not weak. He wore a navy sweater instead of his usual business attire, sitting behind his desk with family photos strategically positioned in the background. I want to address the incident that occurred earlier this week involving my wife Victoria and myself, Marcus began, his voice carefully modulated to convey regret without admitting legal liability. Victoria noticed how he called it the incident, as if her public humiliation was some kind of natural disaster, rather than his choice to strike her. I made a serious mistake in reacting to a stressful situation with physical contact. This was wrong, and I apologize to Victoria, to our unborn daughter, and to everyone who witnessed my momentary lapse in judgment. Momentary lapse in judgment, Victoria repeated bitterly. Not abuse, not assault, a lapse in judgment. Sarah paused her laptop where she was working. He's reading from a script. Look at his eyes, he's not even looking at the camera naturally, Marcus continued. Victoria is going through an incredibly difficult time with her pregnancy, and the stress of public attention has been overwhelming for our family. I should have been more patient and understanding of the emotional challenges she's facing. There it is, Victoria said. I'm the problem. I'm the one who's emotionally unstable. My wife is a wonderful woman and will be an excellent mother. We are working together to heal from this difficult period and focus on welcoming our daughter into a loving, stable home. The video was perfectly crafted by professionals who understood public relations and legal liability. Marcus expressed regret without taking responsibility, apologized without admitting wrongdoing, and positioned himself as a concerned husband dealing with a wife's pregnancy-related difficulties. Victoria's phone immediately began buzzing with notifications. The media was analyzing every word of the apology, comparing it to her interview, debating its sincerity and adequacy. But it was the private messages that revealed the apology's true purpose. Victoria's lawyer, Jenny Walsh, called within minutes. His business partners demanded this apology, Jenny explained. The IPO was in jeopardy, and the board was getting nervous about domestic violence allegations affecting investor confidence. So this isn't about me at all. Corporate damage control, pure and simple, the timing, the language, the setting. It's all calculated to minimize business impact while positioning you as the unstable party who needs his continued support. Victoria felt the familiar wave of manipulation washing over her. Even Marcus's apology was designed to make her look weak and grateful while making him appear magnanimous and patient. What happens now? He'll expect you to accept the apology publicly, maybe appear together for photos showing you've reconciled. He's betting that financial pressure and social expectations will force you back into line. That afternoon, the pressure campaign began in earnest. Marcus's mother, Eleanor, called Sarah's apartment, her voice dripping with concern and disappointment. Victoria, dear, this public drama is so harmful to the family. Marcus has apologized. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive him for the sake of your marriage and that precious baby? Victoria listened to Eleanor's rehearsed speech about forgiveness, family loyalty, and the importance of keeping private matters private. Every word was designed to make Victoria feel selfish for not accepting Marcus's performance of remorse. "Eleanor, did you watch his apology?" Victoria asked. "Of course, dear. It was very heartfelt. He called hitting me a momentary lapse in judgment and blamed it on my pregnancy hormones. Does that sound like someone who understands what he did wrong?" There was a pause. Then Eleanor's voice turned cold. "Victoria, you're being very difficult. Marcus is trying to heal this family, and you're being vindictive." After hanging up, Victoria realized that Marcus's support system was rallying around him, pressuring her to accept an apology that wasn't really an apology at all, but the public response was more divided. Social media exploded with debate about the adequacy of Marcus's statement. Many people praised him for taking responsibility, while others saw through the calculated language to the manipulation beneath. Victoria found herself reading comments obsessively, looking for validation that she wasn't being unreasonable in rejecting his performance of contrition. He didn't apologize for hitting her. He apologized for getting caught. At least he's trying to make things right. This is what abusers do. They apologize just enough to keep control. She should forgive him for the sake of their child. The comments revealed how deeply people misunderstood both forgiveness and abuse. They wanted a tidy resolution where the powerful man said sorry and the injured woman graciously accepted, allowing everyone to move on without examining the deeper patterns of control and manipulation. That evening, Marcus showed up at the hospital during Victoria's routine prenatal appointment, creating a media spectacle that forced her into an impossible position. Cameras waited outside as he played the devoted husband, carrying flowers and wearing an expression of loving concern. "I'm here for my wife and unborn child," he announced to the waiting reporters. "Victoria has been under tremendous stress, and I want to support her through this difficult time." Inside the doctor's office, Marcus performed care and devotion for the medical staff while subtly threatening Victoria with every word. "Victoria's been staying with her sister since Monday," he told Dr. Rodriguez with just the right amount of worry in his voice. "I'm concerned about her decision-making during this emotional period." Dr. Rodriguez looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "How have you been feeling, Victoria?" Victoria realized that anything she said would be interpreted through Marcus's narrative. If she said she was fine, he'd claim she was in denial about her instability. If she admitted to stress, he'd use it as evidence of her poor judgment. "I've been staying somewhere I feel safe," Victoria said carefully. "That's exactly what concerns me," Marcus replied smoothly. Victoria's been isolated from her support system, making decisions based on social media pressure rather than what's best for our family. Victoria watched Marcus perform love and concern for an audience while systematically undermining her credibility. He was so skilled at it, so practiced, that she could see Dr. Rodriguez beginning to view her with worry rather than compassion. After the appointment, Marcus walked Victoria to the hospital exit where cameras waited. In front of the media, he put his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that looked protective but felt imprisoning. "We're working through this together," he told the reporters. "Victoria needs support and understanding, not judgment." Victoria realized she was trapped in his narrative performance. If she pulled away from his touch, she'd look unstable and vindictive. If she stayed silent, she'd appear to be accepting his version of events. Instead, she looked directly into the cameras and spoke with the clarity she'd found in her interview. "The only stress in my life is wondering what Marcus will take from me next," she said calmly. The reporters erupted with questions, but Victoria walked away, leaving Marcus to explain why his wife had just contradicted his story of reconciliation and healing. As she got into Sarah's car, Victoria realized that Marcus's apology had been a trap designed to force her back into compliance. But her refusal to accept his performance had revealed something crucial. She was no longer the woman who could be manipulated into silence. The battle was far from over, but Victoria had just won an important round by refusing to participate in Marcus's theater of false remorse. Victoria's water broke during the morning news segment, analyzing Marcus's latest legal filing. She was sitting at Sarah's kitchen table, reading emails from women around the world who had found courage in her story. When she felt the warm rush of fluid and realized Emma had decided it was time to join the fight. "Sarah," Victoria called out, trying to keep her voice calm despite the surge of panic and excitement coursing through her body. "I think we need to go to the hospital." The labor progressed quickly, as if Emma was as eager to escape the conflict as her mother had been. By the time they reached the hospital, Victoria's contractions were coming every 3 minutes, and she could barely walk between waves of pain. Dr. Rodriguez met them in the maternity ward, her familiar face a welcome sight in the chaos of admission procedures and medical assessments. "How are you feeling, Victoria?" "Scared," Victoria admitted as another contraction peaked. "Not about the birth, about what happens after." Dr. Rodriguez squeezed her hand. "Let's focus on bringing Emma safely into the world. Everything else can wait." But everything else couldn't wait, because Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with his lawyer, his publicist, and a carefully prepared statement about his parental rights. Victoria could hear his voice in the hallway, projecting authority and concern for the benefit of hospital staff and any lurking reporters. "I understand my wife has requested that I not be present for the birth," Marcus announced loudly enough for multiple people to hear. "While I respect her wishes during this emotional time, I want everyone to know that I'm here to support Victoria and our daughter in whatever way I can." Victoria was between contractions when the nurse delivered his message. "Mrs. Morrison, your husband is asking to speak with you." "No," Victoria said firmly. "I've made my wishes clear. He's saying he has parental rights. He has no rights in this delivery room that I don't grant him," Jenny Walsh interrupted, appearing at Victoria's bedside with legal documents in hand. These papers establish Victoria's right to control who is present during her medical procedure. Victoria had never been so grateful to see her lawyer, who had anticipated Marcus's tactics and prepared accordingly. But Marcus wasn't finished. His voice carried down the hospital corridor as he spoke to reporters who had somehow gained access to the maternity floor. "I'm deeply concerned about the isolation my wife has experienced over the past week. She's been cut off from her family, surrounded by people who are encouraging her to view our marriage problems as more serious than they are." Even in active labor, Victoria could hear the manipulation in his words. He was painting her support system as the problem, positioning himself as the reasonable party being unfairly excluded from his daughter's birth. "Victoria's decision-making has been affected by the stress of this situation," Marcus continued. "I'm worried about her mental state and how it might impact her ability to care for our newborn daughter." Victoria's contraction peaked just as she heard those words, and she gripped Sarah's hand with enough force to leave marks. "He's building his case," she gasped between breaths. "Even now, he's building his case to take Emma." Sarah smoothed Victoria's hair back from her sweaty forehead. "Let him talk to the reporters. Honey, you focus on bringing our girl into the world safely." But the psychological warfare continued throughout Victoria's labor. Marcus held court in the waiting area, granting interviews to reporters who portrayed him as a concerned father being kept from his daughter's birth by his wife's supporters. "I love Victoria deeply," he told the cameras. "This separation isn't what either of us wants. I'm hoping that once Emma is born, we can work together to heal our family." Dr. Rodriguez tried to shield Victoria from the media circus, but the sound of Marcus's voice carried through the hospital walls like a toxic cloud. Even during the most intense contractions, Victoria couldn't escape his narrative construction. 8 hours into labor, Victoria was fully dilated and ready to push when a nurse brought disturbing news. "Mrs. Morrison, your husband is threatening legal action if he's not allowed to see his daughter immediately after birth. He claims you're violating his parental rights." Jenny Walsh stepped forward again. "He has no legal right to access the delivery room or the recovery room without Victoria's consent. If he continues to harass hospital staff, we'll have him removed from the premises." Victoria pushed through 3 more contractions before she heard Marcus's voice right outside her delivery room door. "Victoria, I know you can hear me. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect our daughter. You're not thinking clearly right now, and I'm worried about Emma's safety." The audacity of his words claiming to protect Emma from her own mother, while she was literally giving birth, filled Victoria with a rage that gave her strength. "You want to protect Emma," Victoria called out between contractions. "Stay away from us. Victoria, please be reasonable. I have rights as her father." Victoria felt Emma crowning, her daughter finally ready to enter a world where her father was already trying to manipulate the circumstances of her birth. "You have no rights that matter more than my safety and my daughter's well-being," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly through the door. Emma Chen Morrison was born at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, entering the world with a strong cry that seemed to silence even Marcus's protests in the hallway. Victoria held her daughter for the first time and felt a fierce protective love that made every sacrifice of the past week worthwhile. "She's perfect," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her niece. Victoria studied Emma's tiny features, seeing her own eyes and nose, but also something that was entirely Emma's own, a determined expression that suggested she was already prepared to fight for her place in the world. "Emma Chen Morrison," Victoria whispered to her daughter, "you're going to grow up knowing you always had a voice." Dr. Rodriguez completed the medical procedures while Victoria bonded with Emma, both of them ignoring the continued drama outside their sanctuary. "Can I see her?" Marcus's voice was closer now, and Victoria realized he had somehow talked his way past the nurse's station. "No," Victoria said firmly. "Emma and I need time to recover. Victoria, I'm her father. You can't keep me from my own daughter." "I can and I will until you understand that being a father is about more than biology. It's about creating a safe environment for your child to grow up in." Jenny Walsh appeared in the doorway, blocking Marcus's view into the room. "Mr. Morrison, you need to leave the maternity ward immediately or I'll have security escort you out. This is my daughter. This is Victoria's recovery time, and she has the legal right to control access. Your daughter isn't going anywhere, but you need to respect the boundaries that have been set." Victoria heard Marcus's retreating footsteps and felt a moment of peace. She looked down at Emma, who had fallen asleep in her arms with the profound exhaustion of someone who had just completed the hardest work of her life. "We did it, baby girl," Victoria whispered. "We made it through." But as evening fell over the hospital and Marcus's voice could still be heard in the parking lot, giving interviews about his concern for his daughter's welfare, Victoria realized that bringing Emma safely into the world was just the beginning of their fight. The real battle for Emma's future, for Victoria's freedom, for the right to define their own family was just getting started. 6 months later, Victoria's small apartment in Brooklyn felt larger than the penthouse ever had. Morning sunlight streamed through windows she had chosen herself, illuminating walls painted in colors Marcus would never have approved of. Emma slept peacefully in her crib, surrounded by toys and books that Victoria had selected based on what brought her daughter joy rather than what photographed well for social media. The divorce settlement had been finalized the previous month, a hard-fought victory that ensured Victoria's financial independence through a combination of alimony, child support, and Marcus's desire to avoid further negative publicity. His business had suffered more than he anticipated from the domestic violence allegations, with several major clients quietly ending their contracts and the planned IPO indefinitely postponed. Victoria sat at her small kitchen table, working on a logo design for a women's shelter in Queens. Her graphic design career was rebuilding slowly but steadily, with clients who valued her work and respected her story. She specialized now in projects for organizations that supported women and families, finding purpose in using her skills to help others find their voices. Emma stirred in her crib, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up happy. At 6 months old, she was a remarkably content baby, as if she thrived in the honest, peaceful environment Victoria had created for them. "Good morning, beautiful girl," Victoria said, lifting Emma from her crib and settling into the rocking chair Sarah had given them as a welcome home gift. As Emma nursed, Victoria scrolled through the messages that continued to arrive from women around the world. Her story had sparked conversations about financial abuse, psychological manipulation, and the courage required to leave situations that looked privileged from the outside. A message from Jennifer Martinez, the woman who had first encouraged Victoria to trust her instincts, made her smile. My daughter starts kindergarten next week. She's confident, outspoken, and completely sure of her own worth. That's what leaving gave her, a mother who knows her own value. Thank you for showing me that it was possible. Victoria had accidentally become an advocate, receiving invitations to speak at conferences and contribute to articles about domestic violence awareness. She accepted selectively, always mindful that her primary responsibility was to Emma and to building their new life. Marcus had visitation rights every other weekend, supervised visits that took place at a family center where trained professionals ensured Emma's safety. He performed fatherhood during these visits with the same calculated precision he brought to business meetings. But Victoria could see that he was struggling to connect with a daughter who didn't respond to his controlling approach. Babies don't appreciate performance, Victoria had told Jenny Walsh after one particularly tense exchange about Marcus's complaints regarding Emma's crying during his visits. They need authenticity, and that's something Marcus has never learned to provide. The ripple effects of Victoria's story continued to spread in ways she hadn't anticipated. 3 women from her former social circle had quietly left their own controlling marriages, citing Victoria's courage as inspiration. A domestic violence organization had received its largest donation ever from anonymous donors who were moved by her interview. Legislation requiring financial literacy education in divorce proceedings was working its way through the state legislature, dubbed Victoria's Voice by supporters. Victoria's relationship with her sister had deepened into something precious and sustaining. Sarah visited twice a week, helping with Emma and providing the emotional support that had been systematically eliminated from Victoria's life during her marriage. Do you ever miss it? Sarah asked one afternoon as they watched Emma play with blocks on the living room floor. The financial security, the lifestyle. Victoria considered the question honestly. I miss not worrying about money. I miss the convenience of having someone else handle logistics, but I don't miss feeling like I was disappearing piece by piece. And you don't miss Marcus. I miss the man I thought he was when we got married. But that person might never have existed outside my imagination. Emma chose that moment to pull herself up to standing, holding onto the coffee table with a look of determined concentration that made both women laugh. She's going to be walking soon, Sarah observed. Everything early, just like her dramatic entrance into the world, Victoria replied, scooping Emma up and spinning her gently through the air. That evening, Victoria received a call from Maria Santos, the journalist who had given her the platform to tell her story. Victoria, I wanted to let you know that our interview just won a journalism award for coverage of domestic violence issues. But more importantly, it's been used in training programs for police officers, social workers, and family court judges. Your willingness to speak openly is changing how professionals respond to abuse cases. Victoria felt the weight and privilege of having her pain serve a larger purpose. I'm glad something positive came from the worst period of my life. How are you doing now? Victoria looked around her small apartment, at Emma playing contentedly on the floor, at the artwork on her easel, at the life she had built from the ashes of her marriage. I'm learning who I am when I'm not performing someone else's version of myself. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. As she prepared Emma for bed that night, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The viral video that had once filled her with shame now felt like the catalyst for the most important transformation of her life. She read Emma a bedbook about a brave princess who saved herself, watching her daughter's eyes grow heavy with sleep. You're going to grow up knowing that women have voices worth hearing, Victoria whispered as Emma drifted off. You'll never have to find your voice, baby girl, because you'll grow up knowing you always had it. Outside their window, Brooklyn was settling into evening, and Victoria felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived authentically. She had lost a marriage, a lifestyle, and a social position. But she had gained something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that she could trust herself, protect her daughter, and build a future based on truth rather than performance. The woman who had stood outside Bergdorf Goodman 6 months earlier, afraid to question her husband's financial decisions, felt like someone from another lifetime. In her place was a mother, an advocate, and a survivor who had learned that the most radical act she could perform was simply being herself. Victoria stood before her bathroom mirror on a crisp April morning, 9 months after the slap that changed everything. The ritual was the same as it had been during her marriage morning light: careful assessment, preparation for the day ahead, but everything else had transformed so completely that she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Gone was the carefully constructed facade that Marcus had required. Her hair was shorter, cut in a style she had chosen herself. Her clothes were comfortable rather than photograph-ready. Most importantly, her eyes held something that had been missing for 20 years, the spark of someone who knew her own worth. Emma, now 10 months old, sat in her high chair babbling contentedly while Victoria prepared breakfast. Her daughter's first clear word had been, "Mama," spoken with such conviction that Victoria had cried with joy. Emma would grow up hearing women's voices valued, seeing decisions made collaboratively, witnessing love that didn't require anyone to disappear. "What do you think? Emma, should Mama wear the blue shirt or the green one today?" Emma clapped her hands and pointed to the green shirt, and Victoria smiled as she put it on. Such a small choice, but one that represented the thousands of decisions she now made for herself every day. Victoria was preparing for her first major speaking engagement, addressing a conference of family court judges about recognizing patterns of economic and psychological abuse. The invitation had come through Jenny Walsh, who had become both her lawyer and her friend over the months of legal battles. As Victoria gathered her presentation materials, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. The woman who had once been afraid to choose her own clothes was now educating legal professionals about domestic violence. The wife who had been systematically silenced was now being paid for her expertise and insights. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Good luck today, honey. You're going to change minds and save lives." Another message from Dr. Rodriguez. "Proud of how far you've come. Emma is lucky to have such a strong mother." And surprisingly, one from Maria, her former housekeeper. "Señora Victoria, I saw your interview on television. You are muy valiente. Many women in my community are talking about your story." Victoria realized that her decision to speak publicly had created ripples she was still discovering. Women from all backgrounds and circumstances were finding pieces of their own experiences in her story, learning to recognize control disguised as care, manipulation presented as love. The most difficult message had come the day before, from Marcus himself. "Victoria, I've been doing some thinking about our situation. Perhaps we could discuss reconciliation for Emma's sake. I've learned from my mistakes." Victoria had read the message 3 times before responding. "Marcus, the best thing you can do for Emma is to become the kind of man she can be proud to call her father. That work has to happen independently of our relationship." His response had been swift and revealing. "You're making a mistake, Victoria. You'll never find anyone who can provide for you the way I can." The exchange had crystallized something important for Victoria. Marcus still believed that love was transactional, that security and care could be purchased with financial provision. He had learned nothing from their separation, unchanged by the public scrutiny or the loss of his marriage. But Victoria had learned everything. She had discovered that she could provide for herself and her daughter, that security built on authenticity was stronger than luxury built on control, that Emma was safer in a small apartment with a mother who knew her own worth than in a penthouse with parents modeling dysfunction. As Victoria prepared to leave for her speaking engagement, she performed one final ritual. She walked to Emma's bedroom and looked at the wall where she had hung photos of strong women throughout history, activists, artists, leaders who had used their voices to change the world. "Look, Emma," Victoria said, pointing to the photos, "these are your ancestors in spirit, women who refused to be silenced, who fought for the right to exist authentically." Emma reached toward the photos, her small hand grasping at the images of women who had blazed trails for daughters they would never meet. Victoria's phone rang as they prepared to leave. It was a reporter asking for comment on Marcus's latest business venture, which had failed to secure funding amid ongoing concerns about his character and judgment. I don't comment on my ex-husband's business affairs, Victoria said politely. I'm focused on my daughter, my work, and my advocacy for other women. The reporter pressed for more details, but Victoria had learned the power of setting boundaries. She ended the call and turned her attention back to Emma, who was more interested in the colorful toys scattered around their living room than in the media drama that still occasionally swirled around their family. At the conference, Victoria stood before 200 family court judges and spoke with the authority of someone who had lived the experience she was describing. She explained how financial abuse worked, how psychological manipulation was disguised as care, how victims were often blamed for staying in situations that looked privileged from the outside. The question isn't why she stayed, Victoria told the assembled judges. The question is how he convinced her that leaving was impossible, that her perceptions were wrong, that her survival depended on his approval. During the question and answer period, a female judge asked, "What would have made the biggest difference in your case?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "Someone in authority believing my story without requiring me to prove that my cage was real? Abuse victims shouldn't have to provide evidence that their pain meets some external standard of validity." After her presentation, Victoria was approached by dozens of legal professionals who wanted to learn more, who shared their own concerns about cases they had handled, who acknowledged that her story had changed how they would approach similar situations in the future. On the train home to Brooklyn, Victoria received a message that made her smile. It was from a woman named Claire who had attended her presentation via livestream. "Your talk gave me the courage to call a lawyer today. After 15 years of being told I was too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding, I'm finally ready to trust that my feelings are valid. Thank you for showing me that leaving is not failure, it's self-preservation." Victoria realized that her greatest victory wasn't the financial settlement or the custody agreement or even the public vindication of her story. It was the growing number of women who were finding their own voices through her willingness to use hers. That evening, as she gave Emma her bath and prepared her for bed, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this place. The viral video that had once humiliated her had become the catalyst for a life she couldn't have imagined while married to Marcus. "Emma," Victoria said as she rocked her daughter to sleep, "I used to think love meant making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Now I know love means growing together, supporting each other's authentic selves, celebrating rather than controlling each other's strength." Emma fell asleep to the sound of her mother's confident voice, the same voice that would teach her about boundaries, respect, and the difference between love and possession. As Victoria closed the children's book, they had been reading a story about a brave princess who saved herself. She realized that the woman in the mirror that morning was someone she was still getting to know. After 20 years of performing Marcus's version of a perfect wife, she was finally discovering who Victoria Chen Morrison really was when she wasn't trying to be anyone else. The apartment was quiet now, filled with the peaceful sounds of a home built on truth rather than performance. Victoria looked out her window at the Brooklyn skyline and felt profound gratitude for the courage that had brought her here. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to use her voice, new chances to show Emma what authentic love looked like. But tonight, Victoria simply sat in the knowledge that she had survived, thrived, and helped other women find the strength to do the same. The slap that had humiliated her in public had become the moment she found her power. What had seemed like her weakest moment had actually been her strongest, the moment she stopped accepting someone else's definition of her worth and began to write her own story. Victoria Chen Morrison had finally learned to recognize the woman in the mirror, and she liked what she saw.